In 2023, two of the most celebrated partners in music history sat down together on camera. Bernie Taupin, the man who had written the words to nearly every song Elton John ever recorded, began telling a story about a book he had read as a teenager, about a short story from 1951, about a lonely astronaut and the idea that came to him on a long drive through the English countryside. He explained where Rocket Man had really come from. Elton John listened. And when Taupin finished, Elton looked at him with an expression of quiet disbelief. I never knew that. 50 years. Thousands of performances. One of the most recognized songs in the history of popular music. And the man who sang every word of it had never known what it meant. This is the story he didn't know. By the end of 1971, Elton John was on the edge of something enormous. He had released 4 albums in 3 years. Critics loved him. His live shows were becoming legendary. A small, bespectacled piano player who performed with a physical intensity nobody had seen before. But he had not yet broken through in the way that would define him. No #1 singles, no arena tours, no superstardom. That was about to change. In January 1972, Elton and his band traveled to a converted chateau north of Paris, a residential recording studio where they would live and record together for 2 weeks. They called it Honky Chateau. What they recorded there would launch Elton John into the stratosphere. And it began, as so many things do, with a book. Ray Bradbury published The Illustrated Man in 1951. It was a collection of 18 short stories, each one framed as a tattoo on the skin of a mysterious wanderer. One of those stories was called The Rocket Man. It was told from the perspective of a young boy. His father was a professional astronaut, not an explorer. Not a hero, a worker, a man who spent months away from home on routine deep space missions and came back briefly before leaving again. The boy idolized his father. His father loved his family, but he could never stay. The father eventually died, consumed by the sun, on just another flight. What Bradbury understood 20 years before space travel became ordinary was that one day going to space would feel like going to work, and that the loneliness of that, the distance from the people you loved, would be the same loneliness any traveling worker had ever felt. That idea would become a song. Bernie Taupin was not the first person to turn Bradbury's story into music. In 1970, a folk musician named Tom Rapp recorded a song for his band Pearls Before Swine. He wrote it the day Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. He called it Rocket Man. It was a quiet, melancholic retelling of the Bradbury story. A father leaving for space. A family left behind. Almost nobody heard it. Years later, Taupin would acknowledge the song directly. He said, "We didn't steal that one from Bowie. We stole it from another guy called Tom Rapp." He said it with a laugh, but he meant it. 3 artists, 1 story, across 21 years. Bradbury wrote it in 1951. Rapp recorded it in 1970. And in 1971, driving alone through the English countryside, Bernie Taupin began hearing it in a different way. Bernie Taupin was driving north on the M1 motorway. He was heading to Lincolnshire, to his parents' home, a visit he hadn't made in too long. It was a 2-hour drive, and somewhere on that road, the opening lines arrived. She packed my bags last night, pre-flight, 0 hour, 9 a.m. He had no paper, no way to write it down, so he repeated the words to himself out loud for the entire drive. 2 hours, the same lines, over and over, so they wouldn't disappear. When he finally pulled over and put pen to paper, the rest came quickly. An entire verse fell out of his mind and onto the page. He was thinking about Bradbury's Astronaut, about a man whose job takes him away from everything he loves, about the drudgery of it, not the glamour, not the heroism, just the distance, the routine, the loneliness of a man burning out his fuse, up there, alone. What made the song different from every other piece of music about space was a single idea. By 1971, astronauts were no longer explorers. They were professionals. Apollo missions had been happening for years. The wonder was fading. Going to space was becoming, slowly, just a job. Taupin wrote his astronaut as a blue-collar worker, a man who punches the clock and goes to the stars the way another man might drive a truck or work a rig. He misses his wife. He misses the smell of home. He is, in the most literal sense, burning out his fuse up here alone. And by the time he gave the lyrics to Elton, he had constructed something that wasn't really about space at all. It was about anyone who works far from the people they love, about the particular silence of distance, about what it costs to do the thing that defines you. Elton John would read those words without ever knowing where they came from, and he would make them eternal. The band arrived at Chateau in January 1972. It was a sprawling estate outside Paris, cold, grand, full of the kind of quiet that invites music. On the first morning, while the rest of the band was still asleep, Elton sat down at the piano. He read through Taupin's lyrics, and then he began to play. By the time the others came downstairs for breakfast, Rocket Man was finished. The music had taken approximately 10 minutes. He had also written 2 other songs before the eggs were done. This was not unusual for Elton John. He composed at extraordinary speed, responding to lyrics the way other musicians respond to chord sheets. But Rocket Man was something different even for him. It arrived complete. The slow build, the swelling chorus, the sense of vast empty space between each note. He played it for the band. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then they went to record it. They recorded Rocket Man in 3 takes. The session at Chateau de Rouville captured something unusual, a stillness in the arrangement that made the song feel weightless. Dee Murray on bass, Nigel Olsson on drums, a 20-year-old guitarist named Davy Johnstone on one of his first recordings with the band. Johnstone would go on to play more than 2,000 shows with Elton John. The sound that defined the track, that swooping, otherworldly texture beneath the vocal, came from a synthesizer. A young musician named David Henschel played the ARP 2500, one of the most complex electronic instruments of its time. That sound, more than anything else, made the listener feel the distance, made you hear the dark between the stars. The backing vocals, Johnstone, Murray and Olsen singing in unison became a signature that would appear on Elton's records for years. This was where it began. 3 takes, and it was done. The producer in the control room was Gus Dudgeon. Dudgeon had been working with Elton since the beginning. He understood the architecture of his sound better than anyone. But Rocketman presented him with a particular challenge. How do you make a pop song feel like outer space without making it feel like a novelty? What few people know is that Dudgeon had solved exactly this problem before. 3 years earlier, in 1969, he had produced David Bowie's Space Oddity. The same producer, the same challenge. A lonely man floating in the void, waiting for something that wouldn't come. Dudgeon was the only person in popular music who had built that specific sonic world twice. He knew what silence sounded like between the notes. He knew how much reverb felt like distance. He knew how to make a listener feel small. When critics pointed out the similarities between Space Oddity and Rocketman, Gus Dudgeon already knew exactly what they meant. He had made both of them. David Bowie noticed the similarities immediately. Space Oddity had been released in 1969, a song about an astronaut named Major Tom, drifting alone in space, losing contact with Earth. When Rocketman arrived in 1972, the parallel was impossible to miss. A lonely man, a vast emptiness, a voice fading into silence. Bowie was not pleased. In May of 1972, during a BBC radio session, Bowie was performing Space Oddity live. Between verses of his own song, he slipped in a line, "I'm a rocket man." It was not recorded for broadcast, but it was documented. Whether it was a playful acknowledgement or a pointed jab at Elton John depended on who you asked. Taupin, for his part, denied Bowie was an inspiration. He pointed to Bradbury and to Tom Rapp. But the shadow of Space Oddity never entirely left Rocketman. The 2 songs existed in permanent conversation, and the same producer had quietly shaped them both. Rocketman was released on April 17, 1972. In the United Kingdom, it reached number 2. In the United States, it peaked at number 6. For a song that would go on to define an entire era of popular music, that would be certified 5 times platinum in America and 4 times platinum in the UK. It never once sat at the top of a chart. There is a line in the song that feels, in retrospect, almost prophetic. Burning out his fuse up here alone, the rocket man never quite makes it all the way. He burns bright, he travels far, but he doesn't reach the destination everyone assumes he did. Elton John had performed the song at thousands of concerts before anyone pointed this out to him. The song about a man who couldn't get home, who never quite arrived, had itself never arrived at number 1. Some things write themselves. In 2023, more than 50 years after the song was written, Bernie Taupin sat with Elton John and explained it all. The Bradbury story, the drive on the M1, the idea of the astronaut as an ordinary worker, the Tom Rapp song that had planted a seed, the whole chain of inspiration that had produced in the end one of the most recognized melodies in the history of recorded music. Elton listened and said, "I never knew that." He had sung those words She packed my bags last night, pre-flight, in front of millions of people. In stadiums, in arenas, in small theaters early in his career when the lights were dim and the audience was still learning his name. He had sung them at funerals and weddings, in films and on television. He had sung them on his farewell tour, knowing it would be the last time, and not once in all of that had he known they began with a lonely boy watching his father leave for space. That's the thing about a great song. It travels further than the person who made it.